This next section is going to cover two main topics, and those two big topics are greatest common divisor and least common multiple. So let's define those so we'll know what they're talking about. The greatest common divisor, we abbreviate that GCD, makes it easier to say. The GCD of two whole numbers A and B is the greatest, the largest whole number that divides both A and B. So it's the biggest number that's a divisor of both. It's got to be common to both. Two numbers that have no factors in common other than one are called relatively prime. So like 2 and 5. 2 and 5 don't have any common factors other than 1. So those would be considered relatively prime. 4 and 13 would be considered relatively prime. 4 and 13 don't have any factors in common other than 1. Relatively prime numbers come in pairs. It doesn't necessarily mean that each number is prime. It's just relative to one another. They're considered prime, air quotes, because they don't have any factors in common other than 1. So if you hear the phrase relatively prime, you'll know what they're talking about now. Okay, so let's see if we can find the GCD of 8 and 20. Well, I guess we need to think about what numbers divide into 8 and what numbers divide into 20, and can we find the one that's the biggest? And a lot of times you can do this in your head. You can just sort of think about the biggest number that'll divide into both of those. But if we want to look at the divisors or the factors of 8, let's think about what are the numbers that multiply to be 8. You've got 1 and 8, and what, 2 will also go in there, 2 and 4. I think that's it. There's my list. Divisors of 8, 1, 2, 4, and 8. Those are all the numbers that divide into 8. What are the divisors of 20? Let's see. Well, 1 and 20. 2 goes in there, so 2 and 10. Notice I'm kind of going back and forth here. And then 4 and 5, and I think that's an exhaustive list. Those are all the numbers that divide into 20. So maybe you thought about it and you already knew what the answer was, but it does appear that 4 is the biggest one that they have in common. They also have 1 and 2 in common, but the biggest one that they have in common would be 4. So the GCD would be 4. And we write that GCD 8, 20, like in parentheses with a comma separating them. That's how we write that. So we say it's 4. The least common multiple, or we call it the LCM of two whole numbers, is the smallest non-zero whole number that is simultaneously a multiple of A and a multiple of B. So it's a multiple that the two numbers have in common, and we're looking for the smallest common multiple. So if we wanted to find the LCM of 8 and 20, we're talking about what's the smallest number that 8 and 20 would divide into. So we're looking for numbers that are going to be bigger multiples. So if we want to look at multiples of 8, you just like skip count by 8s. So you go like 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48. The problem is you don't really know when to stop, right? If we look at the multiples of 20, those are a little bit easier to skip count. 20, 40, 60, 80. And the first time you come to one that they have in common, that's your LCM. We want the smallest common multiple. So it would appear that 40 is the LCM. And the way that we write that is LCM of 8 and 20 with parentheses like that. So that's just the definitions of how you find, or the definitions of GCD and LCM. And so the rest of the section is going to be a bunch of different ways that you can find GCD and LCM for two different numbers.